Hello. Allow me a few minutes to discuss Missouri Senate Bill 55 with you. Senate Bill 55 is sponsored by Missouri District 18 Senator Cindy O'Laughlin, and everyone really needs to familiarize themselves with this bill that has all kinds of harmful language, especially to public education. Currently, there are five components, all of which are extremely harmful to public education. Those are voucher tax credits, charter school expansion, virtual instruction expansion, school board member recall elections, and then also the MISHA homeschool participation concerns. Let's start by looking at voucher tax credits, which are sometimes referred to as educational savings accounts. But if you take a close look at these, this is just another term for voucher tax credits. The creative terminology of an educational savings account sounds more appealing and probably has some people wondering, isn't a savings account for education a good idea? But hold on a second. This is exactly what they're wanting us to think. The simple truth is that the Missouri state budget simply can't afford the expense associated with expensive vouchers or educational savings accounts. Just during the last year alone, Missouri public education had 246.6 million withheld from the foundation formula, 14.3 million withheld from transportation, 78.4 million shortfall in the classroom trust fund. There was $15.8 million withheld from a prior year correction last year. And additionally, there was $39.8 million of a shortfall in Proposition C funds. Those five items alone total $394.9 million that should have been appropriated to our public schools, but the public schools never received last year. If you include the almost $200 million that schools were already unfunded for public school transportation, altogether, that's about $600 million last fiscal year alone that the state was short. Senate Bill 55's voucher tax credit scheme language will simply cost the state $100 million each year and even contains provisions to increase that amount by 10% each year thereafter. Quite honestly, the need for such a tax credit at the state level isn't even there anymore now that the federal tax code changed and people can receive tax deductions for K through 12 educational tuition and expenses. Secondly, vouchers haven't even proven to be successful in aiding student learning. A analysis performed by the Center for Tax and Budget Accountability regarding the Indiana School Choice Scholarship Program noted that none of the independent studies performed on the most lauded and longstanding voucher programs in the United States, including Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Cleveland, Ohio, and Washington, D.C., found any statistical evidence that children who utilized vouchers performed any better than the children who did not and remained in the public education system. They also noted that when a comprehensive study was conducted, it found that traditional K through 12 public school students outperformed both charter and private religious schools. A third point against educational savings accounts is just to ask yourself the question, who are these programs really intended to help? Quite honestly, the average Missourian doesn't have a ton of extra money laying around simply to deposit into an educational savings account so that they can attempt to get a tax credit. It seems pretty clear that the wealthy Missourians are the ones that stand to benefit the most from such a tax credit program. A fourth point against Senate Bill 55's tax credit scheme is the fact that there's just no accountability in it for the schools that are eligible to receive public taxpayer dollars. Unlike the public school system that have to adhere to several state and federal laws and regulations, these schools are allowed to act however they want. Therefore, it creates an unlevel playing field, and if you look closely, there are no provisions in the bill that would punish a private school if their students are poorly performing academically. The truth is, this bill would be one of the most deregulated voucher programs in the entire country. Plus, Senate Bill 55's tax credit plan allows private schools to discriminate on the basis of disability, gender, religion, race, color, and national origin. And this just shouldn't be allowed. Finally, Senate Bill 55 also allows for open enrollment, which essentially would allow students to attend any public school not in their resident district a charter school, a public school, a private school, or possibly a virtual school. And as we discussed, this simply leads to local taxpayer money going outside of the local community and possibly even out of the state. And all to create a profit for these private companies in it solely to make a profit. So, in review, vouchers or educational savings accounts are just too expensive, and quite honestly, Missouri's lack of revenue is not the time to be introducing bills that would increase the expense on the state. They don't work, they're mainly to help the wealthy, there's no accountability included, they permit discrimination, and they create open enrollment, which leads to local money funneling outside of local community. The second harmful component of Senate Bill 55 involves charter school expansion. Currently, charter schools can exist in Missouri only in the city of St. Louis and in Kansas City, but Senate Bill 55 would expand that to include St. Louis County, St. Charles County, Jefferson County, Jackson County, and then also to Springfield, Columbia, St. Joseph, Joplin, Jefferson City, Cape Girardeau, and Liberty. Charter schools have existed in Missouri for over 20 years now, and legislators continually push and assert that somehow they provide the best educational opportunities and are the avenue to creating school reform. But the truth is, Missouri charter schools have a deep history of underperforming and having performance issues. In fact, in 2017, 2018, APR data from DESE showed that the 10 worst performing school districts in the state were all charter schools. Charter schools have proven time and time to be run very inefficiently. In fact, from 1999 to 2017, there have been 65 charter schools established in Missouri, and 25 of those have closed due to academic performance and/or financial issues. Based on that, the state, local, and federal dollars that have been poured into these 25 closed charter schools totals nearly $800 million of wasted tax money. To demonstrate the inefficiencies, we can take a look at the Kansas City public school system versus the Springfield public school system. Both are very similar in size when you consider student population, but Kansas City has 45 elementaries, 23 middle schools, and 15 high schools. Springfield only has 37 elementary schools, 11 middle schools, and 5 high schools. That's 30 more school buildings in the Kansas City area compared to Springfield, which leads to a huge difference in overall educational expenditures between the two different areas, with non instructional costs being much higher in the Kansas City area. In Kansas City, only 6 of the 15 available high schools are public schools, the other 9 are charter schools. Average student enrollment in the Kansas City public schools is about 657 students, while the average enrollment at the charter schools in Kansas City is only 237 per building. Again, for comparison's sake, Springfield only has 5 high school buildings for the same student population, and their average building enrollment is about 1,455. To further demonstrate the inefficiencies between the two systems, if you look at Kansas City versus Springfield, you'll see that the number of non educational related expenses, so the operations of plant, in other words, the operations of the buildings, the building administration costs, and student transportation costs, are extremely higher in the Kansas City system compared to that of Springfield. So if you're asking yourself, what exactly does that mean? This is just a demonstration that Missouri public schools actually spend more taxpayer money on educating the students in the classroom and special programs than in charter schools where more money is spent on non instructional items. Another concern is the fact that the accountability placed on charter schools is an entirely different system than that of their public school counterpart. They are not run by a publicly elected board. In fact, they don't even have to be Missouri residents, yet they're permitted to handle millions of taxpayer dollars without the accountability that accompanies a traditional public school. Missouri charter schools have a deep history of inequitable enrollment practices. In fact, they have a disturbingly lower rate of special education students compared to their public school counterparts, and it's also alarming how many students end up dropping out of the cohorts that they started with and not even finishing in that same school. The fact is that charter schools are allowed to have different requirements than public schools. The State Board of Education doesn't even have the authority to regulate, or oversee charter schools. Plus, charter schools are permitted to limit their class size, which basically means they don't have to accept all students like public schools do. So, to review, Missouri charter schools have a history of performance issues. They've proven to be very inefficient. They have a completely different system of accountability compared to public schools. They have inequitable enrollment practices. And quite honestly, they're just held to different requirements than the public school system. The third harmful component of Senate Bill 55 is the expansion of virtual charter schools. Senate Bill 55 is hoping to remove school districts from the decision making process as to whether it's in the best educational interest for a child to be enrolled in a virtual program. It also seeks to increase the amount of money that a virtual school would receive from a school district. Furthermore, it removes the ability for a school district to remove a student who is failing, even though it does allow the virtual provider to kick a student out. And finally, Senate Bill 55 also makes virtual providers their own local educational agency or attendance center, which in essence makes virtual charter schools throughout the entire state. And we just talked about the problems associated with charter schools. While there are certainly some students who can excel in a virtual program and other circumstances where that would be in the best educational interest of the student, the one thing the COVID-19 pandemic has taught us is that not all students can succeed in a virtual environment. Currently, if a student is enrolled in a Missouri Virtual Course Access Program approved provider, school districts are required to pay the same amount that they receive from the state, which is currently $6,375 for the enrollment of that student. Senate Bill 55 actually seeks to increase the amount that these for profit companies can charge for a single enrollment. This would mean more tax dollars going to the CEOs, CFOs, and shareholders of these private for profit companies. Expanding virtual school instruction under Senate Bill 55 will also lead to the loss of local control and loss of support for students locally. Senate Bill 55 would leave virtual charter schools completely unaccountable to the State Board of Education, which would seem clearly irresponsible given the abysmal record of virtual charter schools when it comes to student performance. Honestly, it's just another way to funnel taxpayer money to private for profit companies and cause a loss in funding for public education while removing the safety net for all Missouri students. The fourth harmful component of Senate Bill 55 involves something new called school board election recalls. Essentially, Senate Bill 55 sets up a situation where if someone was upset with a school board member, they could essentially get a petition signed to have a recall election and cause more tax dollars to be diverted away from educating students and to be put towards the cost of a midterm election. Which begs one to ask, will recall elections exist for our state senators and representatives? The fifth and final harmful component of Senate Bill 55 involves MISHA and homeschool participation in extracurricular activities. Senate Bill 55 includes provisions that would allow homeschool students to participate in local public schools' extracurricular activities and seeks to prevent MISHA or any local schools from having any rules that restrict homeschool opportunities for that participation. Proponents of this provision assert that homeschool families pay taxes too, and therefore should be allowed to participate in local public school activities. But the truth is that MISHA already has provisions and options in place for homeschool students, including virtual or regular homeschool students, to participate in public school activities. The problem with Senate Bill 55's provisions is that it sets up a situation for two different groups of students to be treated entirely different. So please keep in mind that all five components of Senate Bill 55 that have been discussed are harmful to public education in Missouri. And quite honestly, Senate Bill 55 has the potential to be a complete public education destroyer. And the educational experts and professional organizations in Missouri agree as they request that their members contact their senators and urge them to vote no on Senate Bill 55. It is expected that Senate Bill 55 will be debated on the floor in the Senate in the next day or two. So it is imperative that you contact your senator and either write a letter, send an email, or give them a call and urge them to vote no on Senate Bill 55. But listen, don't just take my word for it. If you'd like to read and research a little more, please look down in the comments below and I'll share a couple of links to some recent articles that'll shed some light on how Senate Bill 55 and other similar legislative pushes are really geared at allowing our tax money to go to private for profit companies that in many cases are not local or even Missouri companies, and provide you with the data to back up the poor records of success as well as the complete lack of accountability that has existed when bills like these have become law.